Hello, my name is Robin Skinner and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Acrotrend, and I want to talk to you about why we created the Xpress Validator for OBIEE product. In the typical OBIEE project, you have a development environment which starts with an initial project. This then goes through a system test cycle and a UAT cycle before being deployed on production. Then there's a core project which adds further data sources, adds more reports and dashboards, and generally goes out to a wider audience of users as well. Again, that has to go through the deployment cycle, and, and then there's an update project and probably a series of update projects which again go through a deployment cycle before going into production. After that initial project is delivered, users start to build their own reports in production, start to define their own reports which perhaps are specific to their job roles or create answers that aren't reports that aren't really catered for by the original development team. And over time the number of reports builds up, and in mature OBIEE environments it's quite usual to find thousands of user-defined reports in production. So the challenge becomes, how do you deal with that as you are deploying new functionality and trying to move the system forward? And that unique challenge of trying to take the data warehouse, the Common Enterprise Information Model or repository, and the development produced reports and deploy them into production without adversely impacting the user-defined reports is a real challenge for OBIEE users. So we see that what happens is a code release goes into an OBIEE system and a bunch of the user-defined reports are invalidated by that because something in the repository or the data warehouse that they relied on has changed. So after the code release has gone in, the users go in, they run their reports, they find that some of them aren't working, and they get unhappy and they call the help desk. Now let's look at how Xpress Validator can help. So again, code release goes in, some of the reports are invalidated by that, but what we can now do is we can use Xpress Validator to run a series of tests across those reports, run thousands of reports, and find the ones that have been invalidated, and then create a list of those and hand them to the developer to be resolved. So instead of a situation where the users are finding the problems, suddenly the development team is finding the problems and managing them. So let's just look at the key features of Xpress Validator. Well, clearly it allows you to automate running hundreds of reports with a single click. It lists whether those reports ran to completion or they returned an error, and if it completed, it also tells you how long the report took to run. You run the reports as a logged in OBIEE user, and therefore it obeys the OBIEE security. You can configure Xpress Validator to run against multiple environments, so development, system test, UAT, and production. It can be run interactively or from a command line, which means it can be scheduled. And it allows you to save the results of a run as an Excel spreadsheet. And we know from experience that it takes less than 2 hours to go from installing the product to actually starting to use it to run reports. So now let's talk about the benefits of OBIEE. Well, clearly it gives you the ability to run a large number of reports after a code release to ensure that you know the impact and can manage the impact of that code release, so your users don't see the issues. In the system test and UAT environments, it allows you to run a quick check to test a deployment before starting the main testing of that deployment. And in development, you can use it to run an automated daily regression test. that checks reports are running after developers have made a code change. Since Xpress Validator is logging in and running the reports as a user, you can also use it to check your security setup. You can configure it to run reports that the user should have access to and reports that the user shouldn't have access to. And by passing the right parameters to those reports, you can also check whether the user has access to the right data and that they don't have access to the data they shouldn't have access to. You can also, because we report the performance time taken, because we report the time taken for a report to run, you can actually use the tool to compare the performance impact of different releases and see how that is working. But I think now it's time for a demo.